Hello there, and welcome to this edition of Thought for the Week. It's always good to be with you. Lindy and I spend quite a bit of time in Israel. We take tour groups over there several times a year, and one of the places I like very much is right there on the Mediterranean itself. It's called Caesarea Maritima, a Roman town, and it means Caesarea by the sea, Caesarea on sea. But in Jesus' day, it was a hugely important Roman garrison town. The harbour there had been created by King Herod the Great, and he was called the Great because he was such a great builder and designer. So many of his buildings still exist in Israel and in other parts of the Eastern world as well. And so he was truly a remarkable man. But there were some amazing things that took place in Caesarea, not least involving the Apostle Paul. He was tried several times in Caesarea, and right at the end of his biblical adventures, he was taken from Caesarea across the Mediterranean to Rome to stand trial in front of Caesar's court. But let's backtrack a little bit. We're talking about Peter on this occasion and not Paul. Peter was staying in a place called Joppa, also on the Mediterranean coast, just a few miles south of Caesarea, and he was staying with a very interesting guy. Now, you're aware of the fact that Simon Peter was Jewish, and he was very Orthodox Jewish as well, and so for him, the gospel was for Jews, and certainly not for Gentiles. In fact, he had an antipathy towards Gentiles, especially Romans. Goodness me. They were the arch enemy as far as Orthodox Jewish people were concerned. So it's interesting that we find Peter here at the end of Acts chapter 9, and he's staying in a place called Joppa, which, as far as we understand it, is the same place as Jaffa, the more modern name for it. But he's staying there with a particular man. And this is what we're told. Peter stayed in Joppa for some time with a tanner named Simon. At Caesarea there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion in what was known as the Italian regiment. He and all his family were devout. They were God-fearing people. And Cornelius gave generously to those in need, and he prayed to God regularly. One day at about 3 p.m, he had a vision. He distinctly saw an angel of God who came to him and said, "Cornelius?" Cornelius stared at him in fear. "What is it, Lord?" he asked. The angel answered, "Your prayers and gifts to the poor have come up as a memorial offering before God. Now, send men to Joppa to bring back a man named Simon who's called Peter. He's staying with Simon the tanner, whose house is by the sea." Now, I find that simply remarkable, because the incident that we're about to read, if we were to continue reading in Acts chapter 10, concerns Peter receiving a vision on the roof of this man Simon's house. And it all resulted in servants of Cornelius, this Roman centurion, coming to the house of Simon, collecting Peter and getting him to go to Caesarea to preach the gospel to those Roman people. Now that's an amazing thing. But it's interesting how the Lord leads us gradually. Clearly something had been happening in Peter's heart long before he saw God's vision, which ultimately led to his going to Cornelius' house to preach. And the extraordinary thing is that he was staying in the house of Simon the tanner. Now this guy was a Jew, his name was Simon, but he was a tanner, meaning that he spent his working life mixing with all kinds of horrible things, animal urine and the rest, tanning leather. Well, that was not acceptable to Jewish society. And yet here is Peter staying in his house. It took me some years to realize that that is a significant thing. the Lord was leading him gradually towards a situation which was very different from his natural point of view. How wonderful. Thank you, Lord. You can do that for me too.